emails from people who said they cannot attend the live session, and my mistake, I didn't send out the doodle in advance, finding the best time, and I suppose there would be no best time anyway, perfect for everyone. From my experience, Saturday morning seems to work best because by that time, at that time, Thailand, for example, Justin is still awake, and those already awake. So it seems like it's a more suitable time zone, and a weekend is a little busier than the business week. But anyway, so the plan for today was not to make any decisions, but rather exchange the initial ideas for papers. So brainstorm, put everything out on the table, no criticism, no bad ideas at this time. So more likely than not, most of the ideas that we will exchange today will probably not make it into, on the paper. But at least we will be able to have some initial pool of ideas to choose from, and we'll hopefully start thinking in some common directions to form co-authorship teams. And so I'm not sure if you had the time to look at the ongoing studies that we already have, as well as to look at the data and see if any ideas pop up in your mind as you're looking at those variables. But the idea was to have that initial discussion without forming any teams or committing to any of the ideas. If needed, I thought we may have another meeting of this kind and discuss even more ideas, maybe in a couple of weeks, and then maybe one final online meeting before the actual event, where we may start thinking about the cooperative teams and final papers. But for now, just an open discussion. And so I'm not sure what the best way forward would be today. If anyone has ideas, I guess we can just start with discussing them. Or alternatively, we can take a quick look at the data together one more time and see what blocks of data we have, or any other way forward. So I guess I'll start with a question. So does anyone have any papers in mind that you think you might want to work on?
Vas?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
No. Yeah.
It's Bill Johnson here. I might have to leave around 10:30 or so. So.
No problem. We'll have the recording. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I took a look at the data, and basically I was looking at what I had mentioned in our last webinar about creativity and diversity and that sort of thing, because my interests obviously go back to innovation and that sort of thing. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at that little proposal I sent you, but essentially use the same thing. And I don't know if anyone else has looked at creativity yet in the database in the same way, but it does look as if the data there would allow us at least to look at, I've got two main hypotheses. Teams perform better at creative output than individuals do, even though that might be a null hypothesis, because we can use the alternative hypothesis that certain individuals may be more creative at or create creative products more than teams.
So
and then the other one is team diversity.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
So first hypothesis would be individuals versus teams, right?
That's right. Basically, what I have is the title of the project would be "Are More Heads Better Than One? The Effects of Individual Effort and Diversity in Global Virtual Teams, Leading to Creativity." The relevance and rationale is diversity in team membership has been touted as one potentially powerful factor that leads to more creative outputs for teams. However, there is also the argument that talented individuals can be more creative if left to their own devices due to lack of groupthink and cultural control, etc. So the more experience and greater risk-taking attitude an individual has, the higher the likelihood that that individual might produce a creative output. And then I have the research question is, do teams perform better than individuals on creativity for X-Culture projects? And if so, does diversity moderate the creativity performance relationship such that more diverse teams have higher creative outputs? And I've gone through some explanatory variables, team size. You've got a couple measures of diversity based on the literature in here. And I also looked at the gender. So you have a percentage of males on our team, I believe.
Yeah.
And then they also you have dependent variables, the staff strategy creative rating, pricing creative rating, marketing creative rating. So those various and then various control variables such as demographics, age, etc. So it looks like I mean, something can be done with the data from what I looked at. Of course, I'm not overly familiar with it.
Yes, it's a wonderful idea for sure. And it's probably doable with our data set, but there are several restrictions that we'll sort of run into. one, individual versus teams. We do have a lot of individual participants for one way or another, but usually there is a huge selection bias there. So usually those who participate alone are sort of not as good as those who participate in the team. So those would be participants who either initially didn't speak fluently enough in English and the professor sort of said, okay, can they participate individually? Or people who got kicked out from teams and then finished the project individually. Although we did have a group of people, so we allow non-students to participate. And at some point we allowed them to choose if they want to participate individually or in teams. And so some of them just chose to do it individually, not because they were not skilled enough, just because they wanted to work individually. And so again, the challenge there may be that it's a relatively small sample of those individual participants. And maybe those who choose to work individually, maybe they are more creative to start with. But so there may be all kinds of selection biases going there. But at least we will have a few hundred projects completed individually and then many more as teams. And I think we can look at it, we'll just have to explain in the limitations that, you know, the separation into individual versus team was not random. Second challenge here is creativity. And this one actually may be interesting for everyone because it's a big, big issue. So the word creativity comes up all the time. The challenge is that how do you measure it? And so we have several measures for creativity, by the way. So we do have the variable called that way. In fact, as I said, 4 or 5 ways we measure creativity. But when it comes to writing business plans, which our students kind of effectively do, or developing a strategy, what would constitute a creative solution? And so we've been struggling with that for a long time. In the very, very first year or two, the task was a little bit more open-ended. I believe the very first one was, if you had a $10 million investment, what kind of business would you start? And so there was no instruction other than that. So you have 10 million, think of a product and design, basically a business plan. And in that case, even then, it was a little tricky to kind of determine which one is creative. But then once it became strategy or business plan, the problem here becomes that it's not always clear, what creativity is. And while we do have a dimension every single year that literally calls it creativity and innovation, and so the question literally reads how creative and innovative these solutions are. In reality, as I said, every time I have to evaluate the report, I kind of struggle with that. Like creative, would it be something that nobody else thought of, but maybe potentially not economically viable? Would it be something that just looks beautiful, like if it's some sort of a poster or slogan? Like it's very, very tricky to say this solution is creative and this one is not, especially when the test essentially or task, what is the most viable market? Well, let's say the country says we think Germany is the best market. Well, is that a creative solution or not? Should they enter as a wholly owned subsidiary, as a, joint venture, as a franchising network? Again, which of those would be more creative? Pricing strategy, again, like they say, one team says it should be $100 per product, another one says 150, maybe one says it should be a subscription fee. But again, can we say that one of them is more creative than another? Logistics, the same thing. HR, the same thing. So the only area where there is kind of room for creativity would be probably a little bit more on the marketing side, where they have to come up with some sort of a commercial script and stuff like that. So there will be some restrictions there, but we do ask every single semester, one of the questions in report quality is how creative and innovative the solution is. And in a few semesters, we even ask that question each single question. Like, okay, you recommend Germany, you professors, how innovative or unusual do you think this idea is? You recommend that they sell it for $100 or charge a fixed price versus, some sort of a subscription. How creative that is. So we will have the data, and it would be definitely worthwhile to look at it, but it's not quite the same as art, where creativity is probably a little bit more immediate, whereas here it's a little hidden. And one last comment in terms of individual versus team I just made here. Again, it would be hard to make the case that our individuals are as good as random assignment, but team size, we have a lot of variation there. And we have some teams that have only 3 people, and we have some teams that have 11 people. And so maybe size of the team, in this case, can be a proxy for kind of more heads better than one. And so that we have. And in many cases, it's random assignment. In many cases, in some semesters, we deliberately kept the team small. In some, we deliberately made them bigger. In some, we deliberately made some teams smaller and some bigger randomly. So that probably should be, a very good proxy for number of heads.
Okay. I just had a question about because I agree with you about individuals, and that's one reason why I sort of listed that, it would depend on the the traits of the individual themselves in terms of
Yep, that's it.
high creativity versus low. Do you know if there are any measures of
Well, we have personality, every possible way, and again, presumably, what is it? Extroversion and openness to experience correlates with creativity. So we have that sort of IQ proxy, again, presumably maybe some relation to creativity. So I don't know. One more thing there, if I may show just very quickly, it might play out also. We just literally got accepted this paper a few days ago. If you can see my screen, it looked at how, because you said diversity moderates the relationship. So we looked at how diversity moderates all kinds of outcomes. And one of them was the quality of the report, including creativity, not as a separate dimension, but including. And we did find that at least some types of diversity did correlate positively with quality of the work that they do. So I think your hypothesis will be supported, and it would be a wonderful idea to check it specifically for creativity as opposed to general quality of work. So I'm pretty sure you'll find what you're looking for. We'll just have to think a little bit more about the design given those kind of individual versus team, and given the measures of creativity in this specific case.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But I think that will be a very promising study. I mean, creativity, everybody talks about it. It seems like it's a hot topic. And no, we've never, ever looked at creativity as a separate construct.
Okay, so one step removed, if you guys can hear me, from creativity. In the peer assessment, we have how good are this person's ideas, right? And so is that creative? It's pretty close. And then you have another source, so you can split some of the single source bias issues it might come up with.
Actually, right, Justin, you're correct, and I see Miguel left a comment here. We did actually the work, you're right. So we wanted to study creativity a few years ago, never did. But one thing I did for that study, for every report that we had, we extracted kind of like an abstract. So we had a one paragraph description of the product itself. So they had to come up with some product, I believe, in that semester or two. And then I hired 60 students, I believe. And so they didn't see the whole report. So because, there is a huge halo effect. When people look at those reports, if it looks pretty, they score it high on everything, including creativity. And if it looks messy or hard to read, they score it low on everything. So here they only saw the description of the solution itself, summarized in like 5 lines, and they had to score them each for economic viability and creativity. And again, the reason we did it like that, because we wanted to separate, is it economically viable versus is it innovative? Because not always a different creative solution is, a good business sense, and not always a good business sense solution is a creative solution. And so for at least a couple of semesters, we have those independent rankings of the solution on creativity versus economic viability. And if we go back there, it should be at least 1,000 teams there, maybe, I don't know, at least a few hundred teams. I can't remember how many participated in that semester, but we'll probably have close to 1,000 data points. And for that semester, that's probably as good as it gets when it comes to creativity. We isolated all of the visual cues. We isolated all of the grammar, formatting. It was purely the solution independently evaluated by like 5 or 6 people each time, so we have some reliability. So for that semester, it actually may be good data for this kind of study, defensively good measures of creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, I completely forgot about that, but we do have it.
So just to, you have lots to talk about, but just to add to the comment about peer assessment, what I think would be intriguing in this domain is to do the best ideas bubble to the top. So you can, in the peer assessment, so you could actually aggregate to the team level and compare that with a creative score of the report, and you can take the best creative ideas, you can take the worst, you can take the average, and see which ones actually lead to a better team outcome.
Yep. Yep.
So going to your earlier question, William, is it the smartest, most creative person that leads the team, or do they get pulled down? You can actually test it empirically.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And you're right, Justin. I mean, just about everything we do. So when you state the hypothesis, it sounds very simple, but when you start looking into the kind of details, it becomes infinitely more complex. Yes, is it about specifically one creative person on the team? Is it about the whole team? Is it about the team, the specific person being responsible for that specific question? So, so there will be all kinds of complexities that may be an opportunity for a more interesting, sophisticated study. or may again mess up your simple and nice and hypotheses, because once you look at it like, ooh, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Right.
I have a general question about creativity as such. I mean, is creativity inherently good? I mean, you mentioned economic viability. I would say that's more important than creativity. I mean, you can have thousands of ideas and that's very creative, but in the end, if it doesn't work out, if you can't implement that as a business, then for me as a business, that's not, it's not relevant as such. So I think if we have another dependent variable such as economic viability, that makes much more sense rather than focusing on creativity as the outcome variable.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
again,
of course,
maybe they are creative. They just went for economic viability instead of creativity. So that's another tricky, complicating factor.
It's probably a balance of both. You need to be creative to some extent, but I mean, if you have two creative ideas, I mean, there's probably a sort of, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But I think it's an interesting topic because I'm not sure whether there has been a lot of research on that creativity topic.
Yeah. Well, the good news here also is that for a study like this, whatever the outcome, I think it's still publishable. It's not like you need to prove that teams are always more creative than individuals. If the results show that maybe individuals or smaller teams may be more creative, I suppose that's a good conclusion too. Likewise, we think that diversity moderates that relationship, but if it turns out that it doesn't, again, I suppose that's an unexpected but important finding. So I think it will be publishable no matter what the results are, unless it's something like very, very messy. Like it kind of matters, but just a little bit and only here, but not there. So in that case, I guess it's a problem. But if it's either it does matter or it doesn't, or two heads are better than one or not better than one, I think all of those are interesting findings and potentially can be a good publishable paper. Well, yeah, creativity, as I said, it's an important issue. It comes up all the time. Hopefully this time we'll finally turn it into a paper. So if they'll want to take a lead on this study. So.
Okay.
I don't know, any other ideas on the table?
I have another general question. I mean, there's a lot of ongoing studies as far as I can see from the website, and there's a lot of different authors and co-authors. Now my question is, I understand that not all of the co-authors will be there at the workshop. So would it make sense just to focus on the papers where people will be there in Denmark next month?
Well, ideally, we would like to come up with brand new ideas, like creativity, for example. We don't have anything in development other than we had an idea to do it and even have some data, but never did it. So for this one, if Bill want to take a lead on this study, I'm not sure if anyone wants to join as a co-author. We'll see how things develop. But in this case, he's not infringing on anyone's sort of territory. It's a new study. Nobody's working on it, so no problem. And so in the ideal world, all of the ideas will be brand new and something that we didn't think about. But then at the same time, we do have a few ongoing studies that have been dormant for a long time. And so again, it would be nice to revitalize it. And even if there are more people listed as co-authors, if nothing has been done, somewhere even in the principles of collaboration, we sort of kind of say that if somebody comes up with a study idea but doesn't do anything about it, we sort of have the right to take over the ownership and then revitalize it and complete it. Like, for example, for a long time, we've been talking about using the qualitative data that we have, and we have over 100,000 pages of qualitative data, weekly comments, and turn it into papers. And at least 4 times, I believe, people would come forward and say, I would like to use the qualitative data for a paper. And somehow it never goes anywhere. Like there were even attempts to subject it to some sort of, like text analysis, but somehow it always kind of dies out. And so I'm determined to sort of kind of regain ownership of that project and give it to someone, or maybe even take a lead myself and finally start reading those comments, because even though several people volunteered to work on that, over the years, it's not, it's basically not going anywhere. So therefore, just because somebody expressed interest at some time doesn't make the person, that doesn't allow the person to own the idea. So therefore, if you see a study on the list, if it turns out that it's one of those that is not really, actively in development, I suppose, we can get back to it and start working on it. If nobody really invested more than a couple of hours on it, I suppose it's still an open study. So again, we have to take a look and then see maybe, maybe someone is actually working on it actively. We just don't know. But otherwise, I suppose,
Okay. I mean, for me, I'm quite interested in the free riding issue.
Mhm.
I see there's a few studies already published already,
Yeah.
and some ongoing. The reason why I'm quite interested in free riding is because I've had, especially this term, the last term, I've got some really bad, or some students complained about free riding. I don't know if I mentioned it in a previous meeting, but they complained even to my dean and said they had 5 people in the team and 4 of them were free riding. So I was kind of surprised because that usually there's maybe 1 or 2 free riders in the team, but not all of them. So and I was thinking culture could play a role here because funnily enough, the complaints from the students who complained about free riding were almost only from the UK domestic students. So they complained, I don't know if it's a British thing or not, or whether they are more anxious or more ambitious, or I don't know. But I had a class of about 50 master students, and there's only about 5 UK students. The rest are all international, many Asians, some European students. But only the British students complain about free riding. So I don't know whether that's culture plays a role, or I'm not quite sure what other studies have been published on the topic. I think Vas, you published some papers on that. What did you look at for free riding?
I think you have a much more interesting topic here. Yes, we have a few publications on free riding, and that's a topic, you're right, it is a persistent problem in all teams, including in X-Culture teams. And if we could find some sort of a solution, even if it doesn't get published, I'm extremely interested in seeing the results so we can use it. But the complaining part, we have tons of data and nobody ever looked at it. I mean,
really?
You're right, we have satisfaction, you know, measured weekly, measured at the end, satisfaction with the project, satisfaction with the team, satisfaction with the professor, satisfaction with the work you did, complaints. We have qualitative comments that we can code also for, complaints. You know, we have cases of, records of cases when we had a conflict to the point where, like you said, somebody was complaining to the dean. Yeah. And we never, didn't even occur to me to think maybe it is some sort of cultural. Maybe some people either have higher standards, or maybe they just feel some sense of entitlement. Or maybe in some cultures it is acceptable to complain, and in others you never contradict your professor. So if something's going wrong, you just don't say that. And so we have enough variation, age, culture, rank of the university. Dustin has the data, so we literally can look, maybe students from, top schools complain more than students from, language proficiency. It would be a fascinating study to see what explains this kind of complaint behavior, or I don't know, satisfaction, or both. Maybe some are satisfied, unsatisfied but do not complain, whereas others are unsatisfied and first sign of problem, they run and complain. I think that would be a very interesting study.
Yeah, if you have the data, I'd be interested in it.
For that one, we actually have a lot of data. In fact, we probably have as good as it gets data. As I said, we asked every possible way about satisfaction, pretty much most of that, even every single week. As I said, we have qualitative, we have quantitative, and then obviously as far as antecedents, we have anything from culture to personality to age to rank of the school to work experience, managerial experience, size of the team. I think that would be, in fact, probably multiple papers hidden there. I don't know why nobody ever thought about that, but I think that actually would be like the complaint culture.
Yeah, that's good.
Like Journal of Business Ethics, or any of the international business or management journals, but maybe even some stuff related to marketing or like consumer behavior, because we have those data in very fine detail. As I said, you probably, I probably cannot even think of how better we can measure all of those, things. So if you want to explore it, I think there are multiple papers hidden there. We're going to have several teams working on it, on it from different angles. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. And free riding being one of those. Complaints about free riding particularly, or complaints about all kinds of other things. So this seems like a very promising study. Yeah, if you decide not to take it on, I'm sure there will be several people.
Okay, that's good. What does anyone else think about that topic generally?
I really love this idea, so I don't know. Plus, it would have practical implications for the project. If we can predict in advance who's going to complain and give us a hard time, well, at the very least, I wanted to say maybe we should not even allow them to participate. That's a bad idea. maybe we should proactively work with them and prepare them and kind of explain to them that, things sometimes can go wrong. And so sort of kind of prime them or work closely with them. So,
Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe even in the future, we can look at what strategy works best when you respond to a complaint, like, ignore or assure that you will solve the problem or do something else. So,
Stephen?
Miguel, I think you want to say something.
David has a comment here.
Well, go ahead, Miguel.
Sure. Thank you, David. Just that this seems to jive a little bit with one of the ongoing projects that you have on cyberbullying. Not entirely, but I have worked. I have a couple of publications on uncivil behavior, bullying, and these kind of things. So I'm not saying that complaints on global virtual teams might be exactly the same, but they are, less than desirable behaviors in general. And perhaps that's a theme we could analyze, either make it rather narrow on complaints and dissatisfaction with the team, or broaden the scope and include uncivil behaviors, cyberbullying, and other things like that that could have predictors, as you were mentioning, at the individual, the group, and the cultural level of analysis. Clearly, there are some processual issues that one can take as an instructor, but that's a different take, perhaps. As instructors, we can take some proactive steps to lower the chances that these undesirable behaviors will occur. But that's almost a different discussion that perhaps can be tested, since you have been doing a lot of fine-tuned, very, very periodical monitoring, like weekly monitoring. Maybe there are differences in the dissatisfaction levels, in the bullying behavior, or any other undesirable behavior, depending on how close the monitoring is being done. But I just wanted to throw in the fact that it could go a little narrower or a little broader. But one thing that I want to say, it's almost like a motion of on process. I'm finding the Zoom group chat that you read a few minutes ago, and that William sent a message to already.
Yep.
And I have been using, here and there, as perhaps a good way to park our ideas so that they don't escape our conversation.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I'm recording the meeting, so it automatically saves the chat as well.
Excellent.
So if you want to maybe type up your kind of summary each time there, so this will, yeah.
And the second point that I wanted to bring up is that, to the extent that we want top journal publications, or simply easier publications, not the struggle with submissions and resubmissions, revised R&Rs and so on, the more sources of information, not exclusively self-reported. I mean, we all know that, I guess, but I just wanted to add that if we are able to bring in, I think in one comment a few months ago, you mentioned that there are some under the hood statistics and variables that might be available in the Xculture exercise. To the extent that we can bring those unobtrusive measures into the discussion, I think it's going to be, the study can be a lot more powerful than if we only use self-perception or perceptual measures in general. Whether they're the professors or the students or anyone else's, perceptual measures tend to be a little riskier, I guess, than unobtrusive measures like, time spent in the computer solving this or that, things that the students don't realize, or even us, we don't realize that they're being measured by the technology itself. I'm not sure to what extent that can be readily accessible, but I just wanted to throw in that those kinds of predictors could be extremely powerful variables that would increase the publishability of our work.
And we do have data from multiple sources. We have self-evaluations, we have peer evaluations, we have instructor evaluations, we have qualitative, quantitative, we have administrative records. So we do have as much as would be available. Going back to that complaining, so Miguel, what you said at the beginning, bullying or other real problems of rewriting, you're right. In some cases, maybe complaining is not unreasonable. Maybe there is a problem, and complaining is sort of, expected and even, justified. But at the same time, maybe some people complain even when everything goes well. So we can even factor that in because we do have administrative records. We do know when there is a problem that somebody is not participating. We know even when there is a problem, when there is a conflict or bullying. So we can even factor that in. Yeah. And I see Anna here made a comment that in marketing, there is a whole body of literature on complaining behavior of consumers. So yes, this study may eventually be not only organizational behavior, but maybe even in a sense, some sort of marketing or consumer management or something like that. Because in a sense, students this time become sort of consumers, professors offer them this opportunity and students, take it and essentially become, consumers. So that's an interesting, like multiple fields where it can be published, or theories can come from multiple different, fields. Yeah. David, sorry we interrupted you. Yeah.
No, not at all. Because I've been working on developing kind of what I think would be for me a new line of research, which relates to negotiation theory and cross-cultural negotiation theory as it relates to global virtual teams. So I guess my question, because the talk about complaining and freeloading to me relates somewhat or can correlate somewhat to somebody that would be a more dominating negotiation characteristic in someone else in terms of well, I guess my question would be this. Has anyone looked at face negotiation theory as it relates to any dependent variables? There's some good literature back there on face negotiation theory in terms of avoiding, dominating, and integrating personalities. And then I looked through the data set, and one of the dependent variables that might be interesting to look at that with would be psychological safety.
We measure that.
Yeah.
We measure that.
Yeah, you measure psychological safety. Now, at the moment, I don't think the measurements for avoiding, dominating, and integrating, which are actually, there's a good measurement out there that's been validated, but I don't think it's collected. We would have to collect it in the future, possibly for one round or two rounds. There's so many data points that come from one round, we could get good data just from collecting it once. But I don't want to take off from the original topic, which was about the complaining, because I think that is a very interesting topic. I'd be interested in working on something like that if there's a paper to be started there, because that's, to me, it's certainly, and the psychological aspects of a complainer versus someone who's not willing to complain, to me, is interesting.
And David, you gave me an idea. So again, complaining can be a sign of, being sort of, it can be a bad thing. So someone is unreasonable and complains every time, but it can also be a sign of someone cares enough. And I wonder if we want to look at the other side of the equation. So when complaining happens, is it an indicator of better performance, or teams where people complain? So are those teams performing better? Maybe those people care more. Maybe those people have higher standards, and maybe they actually do a better job. Or maybe when they complain, they just don't want to work hard. They're just lazy, and so all they do is just complain.
Well, there's a lot of, to me, I'm kind of running it through my head, because there's a lot of things that could come up there, because affiliation as it relates to the group. Yeah. You've got people that are self-face oriented versus other face oriented. They're going to be people that are willing to complain. They're going to be more individualistic and aggressive. And let's say a lot of our Asian students would not necessarily be willing to complain, even though they have complaints. Yeah. So to me, it's a fascinating topic. It just needs to be nailed down into a model that makes some sense, because like you said, there could be a whole number of different things that can be researched there.
Not to mention, you can look at it at the team level. So what Stefan said was more, are individuals, or what kind of individuals are more likely to complain. But you can also look at it at the team level, and then either, like for example, one thing that comes to mind, if you look at the standard deviation or diversity or variance in satisfaction. So the teams where everybody is equally happy or unhappy, different from the teams where some people are very happy and some people are not happy at all. So it seems to me that, once you have the situation where someone is not happy and someone is happy, you have that kind of difference, asymmetry in perception of how well things are going. And again, at that team level, you may find some interesting effects as well. Likewise, is it larger teams that complain more, smaller teams, there could be all kinds of team characteristics that lead to that behavior.
And I think we could also link it to the report, the final report.
Right.
Because the interesting thing was, so the students who complained, in the end, they did an excellent report. Right. That's the point. So that's what I mean. Was you were just saying. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad students, but they care more, or they are really ambitious. They want to get a A+, and they are concerned about the report itself. But in the end, they pull it off, and all of them, or almost all of them, they did a really good final report.
Yeah, there is this whole theory of justice, perception of justice, and then reaction to justice. And you have this voice, exit, so basically some people, when they think something is unjust, let's say, for example, someone is a free rider. So presumably in some cultures, people just shut up about it and don't say it. In other cultures, people are very vocal about it, so they complain. In some cultures, people just exit. They say, screw it, I don't want to participate in this. And so I think there are 4 strategies for reacting to injustice. And again, there is probably a whole body of literature that says how culture affects those strategy choices. So maybe we can even use that as well. Yeah.
Can I add another point?
Yes, Lily. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I've done some study on the Big 5 personality. So would the personality have some influence on complaining behavior, or, so I'd assume, individuals who are more disagreeable and also extroverted, perhaps, as you say, you mentioned, if they care, higher conscientiousness.
Yeah, and we have personality, the Big 5, measured in multiple semesters, so we have tens of thousands of cases where we measured that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems to me like we can have a whole range of papers coming. Like this sounds more like a research stream to me rather than a paper.
That's good.
Yeah. Any other ideas? So this one probably will be worthwhile taking a look at, and maybe having a couple of studies developed around this idea. But anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to see if it's possible to look at plans that developed by the students that involve sustainability. And the United Nations has the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So it's sort of a way of sorting out the different kinds of economic and environmental, natural environmental sustainability, and see how that's changing over time. Are students thinking of different types? I think one of the types that hasn't been addressed in the minds of students has been mitigating marine debris. In other words, all these making products out of all this plastic that's ending up on coastlines and so on, going into the ocean. And it might be a type of sustainability that becomes more attended to. I'm involved in the Aim to Flourish, Prime supported. I guess Prime is, an offshoot of Global Compact, which is a UN-sponsored effort, and it's based at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. And you have students, let's say, from one university, thousands of teams of students. But they're not spread out, partnering with people in other countries and other universities, but they're focused on getting actual case studies from people in business on this, and the project publishes these. So it's possible to go in and search the case studies that have been developed, by the students working with the executives in countries around the world, and see how the focus on different kinds of sustainability is changing, or maybe in the case of agriculture, just sustainability itself. Maybe over time it's becoming something more involved in business plans being put forth.
Can it be, one question obviously would be how we quantify it, but can we have all the reports, obviously, all the way back to 2010, so we have almost a decade of reports. Would it be possible maybe just to run them through some sort of a text recognition program, or what is it that, like NVivo or those programs that are designed for qualitative research, and just search for the sort of keywords that would indicate that the team included sustainability as one of the factors? And we can literally just look at the percentage of those words, 2010, 11, 12, all the way to 2019. And so, plus we can probably even see if there is any correlation with the nationality of the team members and how frequently they talk about environmental protections or sustainability or things like that. So if you think that's possible, or that would be a viable sort of, way to quantify it, then we do have the qualitative data at least, and we can probably run it through that, if somebody knows how to do it. I think I pretty much know how to do it if needed, but I'm sure there are people who can do it better. It seems like plus we also had some partners that actually specialize in this industry. Like we had for a few semesters a company called Recycles Revolution. And so that's a company that recycles plastic. And so we must be at least a couple hundred reports that specifically dealt with that issue. And they participated for like 2 or 3 years in a row. So again, not sure if it matters in this case, but we might want to take a look there. So.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, that's again an important whole field. We never thought about that sustainability issue, but if you think we can, for the data, we can use the actual reports and, analyze them for the themes, sustainability, environmental protection, all kinds of, sustainability concerns. We can probably have that data ready as well. Like if you can think of the keywords that we would be looking for or some other form of analyzing those reports, I think we can have it.
Very good.
Do we have anyone here who works with the text data, like qualitative data, all those NVivo and whatever other software used for that? Do we have anyone who has experience? We have a few professors who are not attending the webinar who specialize in that and have done a lot of work. Maybe we can reach out to them and see if they would like to join at least at the stage of data preparation, and then, even if they miss the symposium, they at least can, participate remotely. So it's probably a very promising line of research. Any other ideas that you want to discuss?
Well, I'd like to mention one, but go ahead, Anna. Please.
Okay, so the one thing I would like to do, with Vaz, we have already discussed this idea about...
Anna, you might have put something between your voice and the microphone. Maybe a book or something. If you move it, it'll probably improve the transmission.
Maybe yeah, give me a moment.
It's good now. It's good now.
It's good now?
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing that I would like that I have been wanting to do, with Vaz, I already discussed a little bit. This is something that I would really like to do for a long time, which has to do with different measures for measuring culture at the individual level. And this is not something that is new or whatever, but I never had the opportunity to have access to this such a large sample of nationalities to see how these different scales work on this level. So this would not be a project for a lot of, let's check if this works or not, because we have different ideas, and then we go to the data and, it doesn't work. So this would be like a smaller scale project.
And that's an idea we discussed it last summer. So yes, it's definitely on the table. The good news is that we measure cultural values every single semester. And in fact, we measured it like every possible way with multiple instruments. So we can definitely have probably again several papers from here. The simplest one can be recreating basically Hofstede's or Globe's national averages using student samples. In this case, you have matched samples. And we have literally dozens of countries. I mean, it can be a simple, very simple study, just simply a replication using a slightly different instrument and a new sample and a more recent sample. But that also at some point we talked about maybe assessing the quality of the different culture survey instruments.
Exactly.
We can look into that. We have the instruments, so definitely can reapproach that as well. And then also cultural values as a predictor of kinds of things. We measured them. And we didn't really ever run any correlations to see if culture plays a role in anything. So, or maybe moderates any relationship. So again, lots of opportunities here. So we have the data, that's for sure. So now the question is, what do we do with them? So,
Okay.
Cultural values here. Actually, we might want to talk a little bit more about that just to see, because we discussed a few possible papers here and we probably should just decide which ones we do first and do it. As for this one, the data are there, it just never really touched it. Any other, Justin, you wanted to say also something? Yeah, I'll put here Anna in the comments so we don't forget about that.
Okay, so this idea, we've been bouncing around for at least a year since last Academy maybe, and that is something to do with time zones and sort of, I think Mariana introduced it last time, called biorhythms. But in essence, to what extent do people's working times align or sync up in a team, and does that syncing then lead to better performance?
Those who don't know, this is a fascinating idea. We have the data, we just didn't quite do it yet. So, but Justin, I even collected some additional data for that. So the idea here is very simple. It actually was a student who just said it in a conversation talking about video games, so he didn't even realize that it can lead to a nice paper, but we then expanded it much. The idea was that the notion is, or the belief is, that when people are in different time zones, as in global virtual teams, it is a problem because they're separated by the time zones, and so for them it's difficult to communicate. And so we came up with this idea, what do they call it? Or I think we call it the time zone alignment, or biorhythm, as you and Mariana call it. The idea is that time zones may not be bad if some people prefer to work in the morning, others prefer to work in the afternoon, and some prefer to work at night. So let's say you have someone in Asia, Europe, and America. Those people are in different time zones, but maybe the Asian person, let's say, for example, we have Justin now in Asia. So maybe Justin is an owl and he prefers to work late at night. And maybe we have, I don't know, do we have anyone from Europe here today? Yes, Stefan is in Europe, and so maybe he prefers to work in the afternoon. And then maybe, I don't know, for example, Charlie here is in the United States, but he's an early riser and he prefers to work in the morning. So in this case, they have an alignment of their peak performance, even though they're in different time zones, but it's actually beneficial for them because they're active at the same time kind of globally. And vice versa, you may have 3 people in the same country, but if they prefer to work at different times of the day, for them it's actually more difficult. And so for that, we collected some data. We asked people when they are most active personally, and obviously we know their time zone location. But then I also added a few more questions, like for example, last semester I even asked when in your culture it is expected to be available for work. So maybe even though I'm most active in the morning, but I would be able and available in the afternoon just because my team expects me to. So there is a question about when you biologically most active, when you are available in general, even if it's not your biological rhythm, and then in your culture when it is expected to be available. Again, maybe in some cultures after 5 p.m. people are not even expected to be available, and in others, if you need me, I'm available 24/7. So we have it kind of 3 possible ways. And yes, if you Justin, because I know we started talking about that idea a long time ago, so if we want to take a closer look at it, we do have the data. And so this is a fascinating line of research. And so it may be more about this peak performance alignment than the time zone dispersion. So
I want to add one more sort of kind of wrinkle or complexity that I find is interesting too, and that is there's two overarching themes or guesses as to how groups effectively work across time zones. One is since you have people in different time zones, you kind of have a 24-hour work day because one person ends, you hand it off, another person ends, you hand it off, and another group says, hey, no, it's important to have the same alignment of time because then you can coordinate and talk and so forth. So they're actually pushing against each other. So it'd be really fascinating to see which one actually wins out. And people have argued that the kind of task complexity plays a role. We can try and tease that apart, not sure how, but there's a lot of features with timing and time zone and rhythms and overlapping work days and stuff that I think could be investigated.
Yeah, this one is a really promising idea. I know in biotech, for example, or in IT, they deliberately have offices in different time zones so that they can have this global relay. Asia works for 8 hours. At the end of the day, they hand over the project to the Europeans. They work for a while, then they hand it over to the Americans. And so this way, you basically work 24 hours a day. So yeah, you're right. Maybe, it depends on the preference to work, simultaneously or sequentially. So yeah. This one's complicated, though. I mean, I'm afraid to touch this study, even though, at some point I was very excited about it, collected the data and stuff. But it becomes so complicated methodologically. You have so many moving parts, geographic locations, your preference, your expectations. So we need to outsource it to Justin because he's the data guy.
What I think is great about it, it speaks to Miguel's point, is it takes one step away from the perceptual measures. You are in a time zone,
yeah,
and you're awake at certain times. Can't really debate it. It is what it is. Right?
And even the expectations in this case, even though we do ask individuals, when it is expected in your culture to be available, but once we have, 20, 30 people from that country give us the answers, we sort of get the national, presumably more objective, measure. And so even if I personally believe something, there is a, external source for that same information. So in this case, it would be multi-source data. Yeah, that's a fascinating one. Mathematically more complicated though, so we need someone like Justin to prepare the data. So it's a hard topic. We are almost out of time. I'm not sure if there are any other ideas that you want to discuss. We don't want to keep it too long. Maybe instead we will have another meeting like this in a week or two. So one topic that I really wanted to work on, and I have some people who expressed interest and kind of started working on it, but it seems like more can be done, is leadership. So on the one hand, the question is who gets to be a team leader? So is it the smartest? Is it the oldest, the most fluent in English, the most prestigious university, the richest country, the most work experience, the managerial experience, most international experience, like all kinds of predictors. So who gets to be elected a team leader? And then on the other side of the equation, do teams that have a formally elected leader, do they perform better, or are they more on schedule, or are they more satisfied? Because again, we have some teams that do have leaders, others that don't. And so the question becomes, does it matter when the team has a leader or not? And in fact, depending on the answer to that question, if it turns out that it's good to have a leader, maybe we can even make it mandatory to have an election and have a leader. The complication here obviously is that not always possible to classify the team. Like we ask every week, do you have a leader? But sometimes you have some team members who say, yes, we have a leader. Others say, no, we don't. Some say we have two leaders. So sometimes it's a little bit mixed up, which again, may be an interesting variable. Lack of agreement on what the leadership structure of the team is. Maybe it is a predictor of something too. Likewise, when you ask them who is the leader, again, different people sometimes give different answers. Again, so it may not be as simple to classify it, but we can either select the most clean cases and look at them, or use this kind of disagreement or asymmetry in perceptions of leadership structure as one of the predictors. So do teams where everybody knows who the leader is and agrees on it, do they perform better than teams where everybody has their own opinion about who the leader is? So again, something that I wanted to do for a long time and just never had a good opportunity to do it properly.
Okay, so I don't know much about the leadership project, but what I would suggest maybe consider is the formal assessment, but also in peer evaluations, you have an informal assessment. And the extent to which they match and there's trouble or it works out well, I think could be a good way forward.
Yeah, and I've wanted to do this study for a long time because it's a real practical question for us. I mean, we always debate whether or not we should appoint leaders or allow, or ask teams to elect leaders. But so we have wonderful data. As I said, I've been asking it every way. So every week we ask who, the role of the team members. We ask them about the team structure. So as far as the data, I think we got that as well as it can be done in a setting like this. But now the time comes to do some analysis. Likewise, talking about that also, we had some semesters when we asked teams to have a team charter. So they had to write, a team basically contract and, have some discussion about who's going to be doing what and all that stuff. And then we have some semesters when we didn't do it. And again, it's a simple study, a simple question. But again, the question is, does it help to have that charter in place or not? Maybe even analyze the charter itself, the quality of it and how it relates to performance. Presumably it helps. We don't know, we didn't analyze. We need to know it so we know how to manage the project moving forward. But if it turns out the charter does help, it's an important finding and we might want to discuss it. Or vice versa, if it turns out that it's useless, people believe that it's important to have that discussion and have that document in place. But if it turns out that it doesn't matter, I suppose that's also an important finding. Not to mention, again, we can see maybe, presence of the charter is moderated by the personality of the team. Maybe when you have people who are very open to experiences, maybe for them it's a detriment. And maybe for some other people who are preferring, who prefer a structured, approach, maybe for them it's good to have a team charter and a leader. So there may be all kinds of moderators and mediators here as well. Again, we have the data. It would be nice if someone, could take a lead on that study or help me if
I can work on that.
Yeah, this seems, and my strong preference would be that somebody takes the lead on that. As I said, we do have a data, the question is not only very clear, but it's one of those that is very practically important. I mean, the question always every time we form a team, so should we spend the time? Should we have a formal document? Should we have an election? And so we have enough teams that did it and didn't do it. And so it seems like it would be an important study. And I would strongly prefer that somebody else takes a lead on it because I'm afraid that if it's up to me, it will be another year and nothing will happen. So,
can I throw in a complementary idea?
Yeah, sure.
Which is, as I wrote on the chat, the use of the charter in the monitoring and so on seem to me that those are process boxes. How we manage the process so that we reach certain outcomes. On the other hand, I've been wondering, and for a couple of years or 3, I have been receiving these Clifton strengths. I don't know if you also received those mailers from Gallup. They seem to have developed in the past couple or 3 years a Clifton Strengths instrument that allegedly helps individuals understand what are their strengths. A little bit of positive psychology, work on your strengths. Don't try to remedy your weaknesses. Rather, grow on your strengths instead of, self-deprecating and going through guilt and so on. Anyways, the point is that I've been wondering to what extent something like that, identifying a group's individual strengths and the possibility that they will be giving, that they will make those strengths available to the team could be reflected in a complementarity score or something like that, that would be the group characteristics predictor of GBT outcomes, productivity, satisfaction with the group, certainly emergence of a leader and these kind of things could be strongly related to that. So that's an idea that has been in the back of my mind here and there, and it sounds similar, not related to the one on leadership that you were bringing up. Just a thought, and I don't know whether there's something on the culture database right now that could be used for that.
Yeah, and I think we even have some data on where people have, at least as far as strength, like we know their majors, we know their interest in a specific, question of the report. So I don't know, it can become very complicated very quickly, but we probably will have good data for that kind of study. Well, what I suggest we do is stop here so we have enough ideas to think about. And maybe instead of, because the plan was to have one more meeting, but maybe we'll have another meeting like this in a week or so. and exchange more ideas without the plans to, to commit to them. So just simply because, first of all, many people couldn't attend today, and then second, this discussion leads to some good outcomes. So maybe let's try to have another meeting like this where it just simply brainstorming of general ideas, maybe a week from now or maybe 2 weeks from now, and then one more like a week before the event where we will try to see if we can select a couple of ideas that we will be working on. So we expect about 15 people, and with that, it probably would be best if we had 3 or 4 projects. So this way, we will have enough people per project to do a lot of work in that short time. And also, so we can stay on that cycle where, we work for a few hours, we present what we have so far, we criticize each other's work, and then work for a few more hours. And so if we have like 4 papers or so in development, maybe up to 5, it's possible to do those presentations relatively quickly. Because if we end up with 15 different papers, it would be just too difficult to manage it, and then it would be very hard for individuals to complete much work, in a short period of time. Whereas if it's a larger team, then somebody can be working on the data, somebody can start looking at the literature, somebody can maybe start running some analyses, and so this way much can be done in just a few days. But yeah, if you're okay with this plan, I'll send out a doodle request to see who's going to be available maybe next weekend or a week after. And then one more right before the actual event, so where we will start, finalizing some of the ideas and maybe, forming co-author teams. Would that be a good process? Because here I'm not sure. I think it would be a good way forward, but does it sound reasonable to you, or is it too many meetings or too few? Maybe you think we need more? I mean, the action will be happening in Denmark once we're there, but I'm just trying to be as prepared as possible so that we kind of hit the ground running.
I think you're enabling us to be very proactive by scheduling meetings like this, that whoever can join, wonderful. Probably the more we join and the more we prepare, the more preparation we do, the more likely we will hit the ground running. But at the same time, you're being flexible, that all of us have a summer, or other obligations. So I find this extremely helpful, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I mean, if you are willing and able to do it, I mean, I welcome it, as long as we keep that flexibility.
Yeah, no problem there.
I wonder whether it would be better to try to have one meeting with most people would attend. Maybe probably it's not possible to have everyone.
Right.
In comparison to have 2 in which two more meetings, but in where the attendance would be more similar to this one.
Let's see what Doodle tells us. So I'll encourage, obviously, everyone to attend as many as possible. I suspect that there will be always a couple of people who are not available, but we'll try to get as many as possible. One question that I have, do you think it would be also beneficial to have like a Google Docs shared document where we can have some sort of a discussion, or have like each study that we discussed, allocate a separate page in the document, and then maybe people start, typing some additional ideas, and maybe that way we can have an ongoing discussion. Even if someone cannot join live, then at least they will be able to leave comments there. Maybe I'll set up one. Let's see how many comments we will get there, but it seems like we have like 4 or 5 ideas already that seem to be very promising. And so if everybody can comment, even if, like, I'm happy to comment on studies that I'm not even going to be involved in. And so this way, hopefully, same thing from others. So
I don't see how that would hurt. I mean,
yeah.
To the contrary, you give us the opportunity to interact, and whether it is adopted or not, that's an empirical question that hopefully will benefit us all.
Okay, well, let's try that, and if there are enough comments, great. If not, not a big deal. So we didn't do any of that in the past, and I think it was a mistake because we spent the first day of the symposium or of the hackathon literally talking about things that we are talking about now. And so we don't want to waste the time on on the initial ideas. We want to spend time on actual paper development there. So I think the more discussion we have here live, like now, or online in text format, I think the better prepared we will be for the meeting in Denmark. Okay, well then let's stop here, and then, yes, Justin?
One final comment. I noticed last hackathon, as you said, Vas, a lot of time was spent sort of catching up and forming and things. A question or a proposal would be, maybe we have one meeting or maybe 2 as a group, but let's not curtail the option of smaller groups forming and starting to work prior to the hackathon.
Right. And by the way, another thing, so I'm not sure if we have any people like that in this group, but going back to the very, very first idea that Bill brought up, which is creativity, individual versus group. It's very possible that we may have some people who are, you know, more creative individually or more productive individually and who prefer to work individually. And there is absolutely nothing wrong if you work on the study alone or in a very small team, maybe a couple of people, and maybe, as Justin said, even start working alone before the actual, you know, event. We have still a whole month before the meeting, and so maybe we can even start working on that now. So don't feel, you know, obliged or pressured into joining a larger co-author team. And you know, it's wonderful if if we have bigger teams, but it's perfectly fine if somebody works alone and just, you know, wants to focus on that specific study and just use the group support on the, you know, at the event to get input. So I think all of those are perfectly acceptable ways forward. So let's just see what kinds of group emerge naturally. And if some of those groups are ready to be formed now, like let's say, for example, Justin says, I want to work on that peak performance alignment study. And so let's say, for example, I don't know, someone else is interested in that as well. No need to wait until the actual event. Like Mariana will be there and she is interested in this study. You can literally come there almost with a prepared paper and just spend that time, you know, polishing it and getting, you know, final feedback. So yeah, all of those are definitely possible, you know, viable options. So, all right, well then I'll call for another meeting, then send a doodle probably within the next 2 weeks, and then we can brainstorm more ideas. And then hopefully by the end of that next meeting, we will start having some clear idea as to which papers we will be working on, and then maybe have one more meeting before the event where we finalize all the plans and then obviously work on them, you know, in physical.
Thought, Vaz, that could just be helpful. What about focusing on a particular product, like a submission to the MED division of AOM or to the AIM, so that we can have, you know, a very specific number of words in the title and so on? Not immediately, but just the near future. Thank you very much.
That's exactly the plan. So we have AAP deadline in November, AAM deadline in January, and then hopefully a paper submission sometime soon. So that's the plan. So let's see if we can meet those self-imposed deadlines. But yeah, that's exactly the plan.
Excellent. Thank you again. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I'll share the recording with everyone then.